I remember the moment down to the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. My son Daniel stood in my living room in his tailored suit, phone in hand, a look of pride on his face. "Just sent 100,000 to Victoria," he said. "She's been incredible to us, opened every door in Willow Crest." He turned the phone screen toward me so I could see the wire confirmation. Then, with the same hand, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin white envelope. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said casually. Inside was a $10 department store gift card. $10. He smiled as if he had done his duty. I stared at that card, feeling my throat close. The room felt smaller than it had ever been. That night, the version of me who accepted scraps finally died. When I was 29, I gave birth to Daniel in a small county hospital with peeling paint on the ceiling and one nurse on night duty. His father left 2 months later, taking our joint savings and leaving behind a pile of debt. For years, I worked as a records clerk for the city, steady pay, modest benefits, no glamour. At night, I took on extra shifts typing reports for attorneys. Every dollar went into Daniel's future. While my co-workers bought new cars or went on cruises, I kept driving a faded blue Honda and patched my winter coat with old thread. When Daniel's school trip to Washington came up, I sold my mother's ruby ring to cover it. I thought love meant sacrifice, that every missed vacation, every meal stretched to last 2 days was worth it if he could have the kind of life I never did. And for a long time I believed it was. The day of my 65th birthday began like any other. I made coffee, watered the plants on my balcony, and set out 2 slices of banana bread, just in case Daniel and his wife stopped by. Around noon, the buzzer rang. For a moment, my heart lifted. When they walked in, Daniel barely looked around. Sabrina was behind him, tapping her phone with perfect nails. "Mom, we need to talk," Daniel said, sitting without taking off his jacket. "We're buying a house in Willow Crest, 3 bedrooms, a pool, a gym. It's a major step for our image." I smiled, genuinely happy for him. "That sounds wonderful." Sabrina finally looked up. "My mother's been helping with connections. She knows everyone that matters." Daniel nodded, proud. "I just sent her $100,000 as a thank you." The number hung in the air like smoke. He turned his phone so I could see the confirmation screen. Then he pulled out the envelope. "And this is for you," he said lightly. "Happy birthday." Inside was a $10 gift card. "For the scraps," Sabrina murmured, not even trying to whisper. Daniel added, "You could buy something to look more presentable. It might help when people meet you." I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. My fingers trembled around that thin piece of plastic. Before leaving, Daniel looked at my small apartment. "You should sell this place, Mom. Maybe get a little work done, for your confidence." The words hit harder than any slap. I nodded, waiting for the door to close before letting the silence swallow me whole. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every word replayed in my head, the tone, the smirk, the casual cruelty. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the $10 card, the one thing my son thought I was worth. Around 2 in the morning, I opened my old laptop. The soft glow of the screen lit the small kitchen. I logged into my bank account, then my savings portfolio. $812,000. Daniel had no idea. I had spent my life pretending I had just enough, never more. It was safer that way. People treat you differently when they think you have money, and not always better. I traced the numbers on the screen with my fingertip. 40 years of modest living, skipped luxuries, and silent discipline quietly stacked like bricks. I realized I wasn't poor, I was discreet. That night, I decided I would stop financing other people's dreams. It was time to invest in my own. The next morning, I called a financial advisor recommended by my friend May. His name was Robert Lang, a calm man with silver hair and kind eyes. When I arrived at his office, he shook my hand firmly. "You've done the hard part, Mrs. Bennett," he said. "You've saved. Now let's make your money work for you." We spent 2 hours reviewing everything. My pension, the small city bonds I'd held for decades, the untouched inheritance from my aunt that had quietly grown in a mutual fund. Robert helped me reorganize, diversify, and think like an investor, not a warrior. We set up a balanced plan: treasury bills for security, index funds for growth, and a slice of real estate investment for income. "You don't need to gamble," he said. "You just need to be intentional." That night, I made tea and looked out my window at the city lights. For the first time in my life, money didn't feel like fear or sacrifice. It felt like power, quiet, steady, earned. I wasn't saving to survive anymore. I was preparing to live. 2 days later, Daniel called. His voice was brisk, practiced the tone he used with patience. "Mom, I need you to co-sign for a new equipment loan. It's just a formality." I glanced at the steaming mug in my hand. "That won't be possible, Daniel." A pause. "What do you mean? You've always helped." "I have plans," I said simply. He gave a short laugh. "Plans? You barely leave the apartment? What are you doing, bingo with the neighbors?" I smiled to myself, something like that. He didn't like that answer. "Fine, forget it," he said sharply. "I'll figure it out." When the line went dead, I sat back in my chair and felt an unfamiliar calm wash over me. That single word, no, had more weight than any gift I'd ever given him. It was the first boundary I had drawn in decades, and once you learn the power of no, it's impossible to go back to silence. A week later, I met a realtor named Paige at a small cafe downtown. She was young, energetic, and spoke quickly, her tablet glowing with property listings. "I'm looking for something new," I told her. "Quiet, safe, with light and space to breathe." She smiled. "I think I have just the thing." Over the next few days, she showed me houses, some big but soulless, others charming but cramped. Nothing felt right until we drove through the iron gates of Willow Crest, the same exclusive community Daniel and Sabrina had bragged about. At the end of a tree-lined street stood a 3-story home with wide windows and a wraparound porch. The sunlight hit the cream-colored brick just right. "This one's special," Paige said softly. Standing in the foyer, I could almost hear my younger self whispering, "Don't be afraid to take up space." I turned to her and said, "If I'm moving up." And I meant it. 6 weeks later, the house was mine. The papers signed, the funds transferred, $1.4 million, paid in full. No mortgage, no debt, no permission asked. I spent the next month turning it into a reflection of the woman I had always been inside. Polished floors, bookshelves filled with memories, soft colors that spoke of quiet confidence. Nothing flashy, just dignity restored. When I finally moved in, I asked the gate guard to let a particular car through the next day at 4 p.m. A black sedan belonging to Dr. Daniel Bennett. At exactly 4:03, I watched from the balcony as Daniel's car rolled up the drive. He stepped out, scanning the property with disbelief. Sabrina followed, clutching her purse, and behind her was Victoria, face carefully composed. "Mom," Daniel called hesitantly, "this is yours?" I walked down the steps slowly, calm, collected. "Welcome to my home," I said. "Would you like some coffee?" The housekeeper just prepared a fresh pot. Inside, the marble floors gleamed beneath their shoes. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and cedar. I guided them into the sitting room where fine china waited on a tray, ironically the same brand Victoria collected. Daniel looked around, his jaw tight. "How did you afford this?" "The same way I paid for your education," I replied evenly. "Work, patience, and a lifetime of saying no to myself." Sabrina blinked. "You paid $1.4 million in cash?" "Yes," I said. 40 years of saving adds up when you're not trying to impress anyone." Victoria's smile faltered. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "So this is what you've been hiding?" I met his eyes. "No, Daniel, this is what I've been building." Silence filled the room, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, my son looked at me and truly saw me. After they left, the house was silent again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence I had known before. It wasn't empty, it was peaceful. I sat in the living room, watching the last light of afternoon spill across the marble floor. On the coffee table lay 3 untouched cups of coffee, mine still warm, theirs gone cold. The smell of cinnamon pastries lingered, reminding me of the control I had finally taken back. That night, my phone lit up with messages. "Mom, can we talk? You really blindsided me today? Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't reply. The next morning, a delivery arrived at my gate, a bouquet of roses and a small card that read, "5 minutes, please." I placed the flowers in a vase and set the note beside them. Over the next week, the gifts kept coming: chocolates, candles, even a framed photo of us from his graduation. Every gesture carried guilt, not love. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to forgive. I didn't feel the need to explain or make peace. Respect, I had learned, grows in silence, and silence finally was mine to keep. 3 days later, Daniel showed up without calling. The guard rang to ask if I would let him in. I hesitated, then said yes. He looked tired, the confident posture gone. His eyes moved across the study where I sat, rows of books on finance, psychology, and travel. "This is different," he murmured. "It's me," I said simply. "Maybe for the first time?" He sat across from me, shifting in the leather chair like it might swallow him whole. "Why didn't you ever tell me you had this kind of money?" "Would it have changed how you treated me?" I asked. He hesitated. "Maybe." "That's why," I said. "People show who they are when they think you have nothing to give." He looked at the floor, then up at me again. "So how much do you really have?" "Enough," I answered. "Enough to live on my terms." He frowned. "You're my mother." "I am," I agreed. "But I'm not your bank, your secretary, or your afterthought." For once, he had no answer. The silence between us felt raw, but it was finally honest. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Sabrina alone. She stood on the porch in jeans and a loose sweater, her usual polish replaced by something almost human. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I led her to the living room. She looked around. Slower than before, her eyes tracing the framed photos on the mantel, me holding Daniel as a baby, his graduation, a snapshot of us, laughing in the park years ago. "I didn't come here to defend myself," she began. "I came because I owe you an apology." I said nothing, waiting. I was cruel, dismissive. I thought wealth and status meant value. My mother raised me to believe that. But lately she hesitated, then pressed a trembling hand to her stomach. "Lately I've been rethinking everything. I'm 3 months pregnant." The words settled between us like sunlight after rain. "I don't want my child to grow up thinking money decides who deserves respect," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I don't want them to be like me." I exhaled slowly. "Then start changing now, Sabrina. That child deserves a mother who knows what real worth looks like." For the first time, she nodded and meant it. A few days later, I agreed to meet Daniel at a quiet cafe downtown. When I arrived, he was already there, staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of pride had finally slipped from his shoulders. "Thanks for coming," he said softly. "I'm here because Sabrina asked me to be," I replied. He nodded, guilt flickering in his eyes. "She told me you know about the baby." "I do," I said. "And I also know we can't go back to what we were." He looked up quickly. "Then what do we do?" "We start new," I said. "No more lectures, no more guilt. Respect first, always. We talk when it matters, not when it's convenient. And we never use money as a weapon again." Daniel swallowed hard. "I can try." "Don't try," I corrected. "Do for yourself, for your family, for the child on the way." He reached across the table, hesitant but sincere. "Can we build something different, Mom?" I took his hand. "We can, but it has to be built on truth this time." He nodded, and for the first time I believed him. It happened 2 months later, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My phone rang and Sabrina's voice came through, shaky and breathless. "Nora, I think something's wrong. The baby. I'm having contractions and Daniel's out of town for a medical conference. Can you take me to the hospital?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." When I arrived, she was standing in the doorway, pale and terrified. I helped her into the car, keeping my voice calm even as my heart pounded. "Breathe, sweetheart, we'll get there." At the hospital, tests revealed it was only false labor Braxton Hicks contractions. The relief made us both laugh and cry at the same time. When Daniel rushed in hours later, he found us sitting side by side, sipping tea from paper cups. "Thank you," he said, emotion thick in his voice. I smiled faintly. "I've always been here, Daniel. You just stopped noticing." 2 months later, in the quiet of early morning, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice trembled. "She's here, Mom," he said. "A healthy baby girl. She has your eyes." I froze, tears rising before I could speak. "What's her name?" He paused, then said softly, "Clara. We wanted to name her after your middle name, after the woman who taught us what real value looks like." When I reached the hospital, Daniel was standing by the window, holding a tiny pink bundle. He turned, smiling through tears. "Do you want to hold her?" he asked. I took Clara into my arms, feeling her heartbeat flutter against my chest. "Hello, my sweet girl," I whispered. I'm your grandmother, and you will never doubt your worth." Daniel placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. For once, no words were needed. Not long after Clara's birth, the world that Sabrina and her mother had built on appearances began to crumble. Victoria's husband's investment firm folded after a series of bad decisions, and whispers spread through their social circles like wildfire. Lunch invitations stopped coming. The charity board she loved so much found new faces to host their galas. The beach house she had been bragging about was quietly taken off the market before it was ever purchased. One afternoon, Victoria called me. Her voice was thinner than usual, stripped of its usual confidence. "Nora," she said, "I was wondering if we could meet." When she arrived, she didn't come with perfume or pearls, just tired eyes and folded hands. "I don't need money," she said. "I need advice. I don't know how to live without pretending anymore." For the first time, I saw her not as an enemy, but as a woman finally facing the truth. In the months that followed, something unexpected happened. I began helping Victoria not out of pity, but because she was finally ready to listen. We met once a week over coffee, going through her bills, her plans, her fears. "I used to think simplicity was failure," she admitted one morning. "Now it feels like freedom." Daniel watched all of this with quiet amazement. "I never thought I'd see you two in the same room without a war breaking out," he said half-jokingly. "People can change," I told him, "if they're willing to lose their masks." Meanwhile, Sabrina invited me to help decorate Clara's nursery. Soft greens, tiny stars, a rocking chair by the window. "I want her to grow up surrounded by calm, not competition," she said. For the first time in years, our family felt like something real, not perfect, not polished, but honest. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was renewal. Clara's first birthday arrived on a warm afternoon in early spring. We celebrated in my backyard, under the shade of the old maple tree. No extravagant caterers, no designer decorations, just laughter, homemade food, and the people who truly mattered. Daniel grilled while Sabrina arranged flowers in small mason jars. Victoria arrived quietly, carrying a single wrapped gift. Inside was a children's book, Sabrina's favorite from childhood. "It's not much," she said softly, "but it meant a lot to us once." I smiled. "Then it's perfect." When the candles were blown out, I watched Clara toddle barefoot through the grass, her tiny hands reaching for the bubbles floating in the air. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just a party. It was proof that love could grow again, even after years of neglect. We were building something new, one honest moment at a time. A few months after Clara's birthday, Daniel stopped by one afternoon. He looked different, calmer, more grounded. In his hand was a small velvet box. "I was going to wait until Christmas," he said, "but this feels like the right moment." Inside was a delicate white gold bracelet, simple yet elegant. On the inside, engraved in neat letters, were the words for the woman who taught me the true value of things. I traced the engraving with my thumb, my throat tightening. "It didn't cost $100,000, Daniel said quietly, a half smile on his face, "but it means more than anything I've ever given." I fastened the bracelet around my wrist. "It's never about the price," I told him. "It's always about the intention." For once, he didn't try to answer. He just nodded, eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years: respect. That night, after Daniel left, I sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The bracelet caught the glow, soft and steady like a quiet promise. I thought about all the years I had spent balancing the wrong ledger. I had counted bills, receipts, sacrifices, but never the cost of self-respect. There are two kinds of wealth in life: the kind you can spend and the kind you can stand on. For decades, I had mistaken one for the other. Now, at 67, I finally understood. Money builds comfort, dignity builds peace. And peace, I realized, is the greatest fortune of all. A year later, I hosted another gathering at my home. Clara was walking now, her tiny feet pattering across the wooden floors. Daniel and Sabrina laughed as they chased her through the garden, while Victoria helped set the table with quiet grace. As I watched them, I realized that what had once been fractured had become whole in its own imperfect way. We still stumbled, still disagreed, but there was respect now, real, earned respect. When Daniel joined me on the balcony at sunset, he said, "Mom, you didn't just rebuild yourself, you rebuilt all of us." I smiled. "Maybe, but you all had to decide to grow too." He nodded, slipping his arm around my shoulders. Life had taught me that revenge doesn't always come in fury or payback. Sometimes it comes in peace and knowing who you are and never shrinking again. And that, I realized, was my real victory. As I tucked Clara into her stroller that evening, her tiny hand caught my bracelet. She giggled, fascinated by the soft shimmer under the fading sun. I smiled, knowing that one day she'd understand its meaning not as jewelry, but as a reminder that strength can be quiet. When everyone left, I stood alone in the doorway, the house warm with echoes of laughter. A few years ago, I had been invisible in this family, useful, then disposable. Now I was seen, heard, respected. The journey had started with humiliation, a $10 gift card, and a $100,000 insult. But it ended with something far richer: self-worth, peace, and a family that had finally learned what value truly means. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like the video, share it, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because somewhere out there, another mother needs to hear this. She needs to know it's never too late to start living for herself.